Hamilton coming to the Disney Channel on July 3rd, probably the biggest news of the day. And I have been warning all people out there who are married to Hamilton addicts like I am that they might as well prepare to watch it 3, 4, 5 times on July 3rd and 4th. Admiral James Stavridis, retired United States Navy, former Allied Supreme Commander of NATO, former head of Southern Command. I suspect he's a Hamilton fan, though not an addict. Am I right about that, Admiral?
I think you've got it exactly right. It's an important piece of history, and I love the way the contemporary production brings it together with music and cultural mores. It's a terrific piece of work.
Right now, Admiral, I'm going to turn to China in a second, but first I want to tap your chops as an educator. California State University system is going to, quote, reopen virtually. They're not going to let students back on campus. My advice to those students is don't go. I mean, you can get virtual college campus experience from Hillsdale for free, and you can go live somewhere else and use the local library. And I thought of you and the Admiral's bookshelf, and the fact is, if you want to educate yourself, you don't need to go to a college, period, but you certainly don't need to be trapped on an online. What is your advice to parents who are looking at stroking big checks for an online experience?
Let me first give some advice to higher education broadly. And as you allude to, I spent 5 years as dean of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, one of the top graduate schools of international relations. I think it's too soon to make that call on the fall. I think there could be a blended approach, which brings some of the students in a cohort. They get educated on campus with appropriate social distancing. You cycle them, you bring in another cohort. You could certainly do a blend of online and in person. But to your point, and to answer the question, a fundamental part of what you pay for as a parent or as a student yourself is that interaction with the other students. That's such a fundamental part of higher education, both baccalaureate, master's, even PhD, that integration is crucial. You're not getting full value for the money. If Cal State wants to take that approach, I think they're going to have to significantly discount tuition for that semester at a minimum.
I agree with that. Now, network effects of going with people are what matter. I noted at the beginning of the show that United States Naval Academy graduate Mike Garcia appears to have won his congressional race in California's 25th. I think he's class of 1989, and Super Hornet pilot. That'll be a great addition to the Congress. But the network effects of attending Annapolis never go away, right? But that's because you've bunked with someone in close quarters and you've eaten in the largest dining room in America for 4 years.
That's exactly right. 4,000 midshipmen sit down all at once to one meal together in Bancroft Hall. And it is a fundamental part of what makes Annapolis, West Point, our Air Force Academy at Colorado Springs, Merchant Marine Academy in Kings Point, New York. What makes them all work is that bonded personal experience. And if we're going to maintain that, and I would argue that is a significant part of our ability to defend the nation, those connections. Look at the World War II admirals that were so deeply connected by their time together at Annapolis. We can't let that drift away in the face of this virus. And I'm sure the service academies are going to bring those students in. They'll give them a quarantine period. Then they will isolate, put them in a bubble, and educate them. That's hard to do, but you've got to do it for national defense, and I think universities are going to have to figure out a way to do something similar.
Now, you just mentioned the admirals, and Sailing True North is your most recent book. Your ears might have been burning yesterday. I was talking to Harry Rhodes, our mutual friend at the Washington Speaker Bureau. And Paul Begala and I used to do ham and eggs out on the road. We do political stuff. That doesn't work online, right? A lot of that is actually the physical part of being together and interacting. And, you know, I'm just a straight man. I'm Dick Smothers to Tommy Smothers when I'm out with Begala. But you and the Admiral's presentation, I just think you're made for virtual meetings. Have you done many of those yet?
I have. I'm doing 2 or 3 a week. Mostly pro bono right now, but I'm hoping over time this can be part of the good work we do together for the Washington Speakers Bureau. It is a reality of the moment. I don't think it'll ever substitute for the power of the in-person presentation, but it certainly can be very effective. And yes, I'm doing a fair amount of that right now and enjoying it.
I just tell a little commercial for the Admiral. Because it is multimedia, it's a lot better than listening to Begala and Hewitt talk at you over the virtual screen. It just is, it's a very well done thing. Now let's get to China, Admiral. I'm going to talk with our mutual friend Richard Haas a little bit later. I'm going to argue with him because he doesn't want to say we're in Cold War 2.0. And I'm sorry, I'm from the Nixon school. I spent 78, 79, and 80 with Richard Nixon right out of college writing The Real War with him. And you call the world as it is so that you can manage it, that it might become what you hope. And right now we are in a full-throated confrontation. I'm looking at two headlines. Trump raises threat of new front in economic conflict with China from the Financial Times, from the Wall Street Journal on the ground in Wuhan, signs of China stalling probe of coronavirus origins. A lot of people, including the vice president, don't want to use Cold War 2.0 on this show, Admiral, but I do. What do you think of it?
I think we are close to that, but not quite there. So you and I both have a lot of regard for Dr. Henry Kissinger. I want to say about 6 months ago, he said we are in the foothills of a Cold War, which is to say we're ascending a mountain toward a peak we don't want to get to, but we're not quite there yet. So I think this is one where people can have a debate about where we are. What we all agree on, you, me, Richard Haas, Dr. Kissinger, I'm sure, is that tensions are rising significantly. And that when you lay this coronavirus on top of what was already an increasingly fraught relationship because of trade and tariff imbalance, because of the 5G network confrontation, because of cyber activity, very aggressive by China, because of artificial islands in the South China Sea. That was fraught to begin with 8 months ago. Park coronavirus on top of it. We are definitely moving out of those foothills and toward a full-blown Cold War. I think we would all agree on that.
Yeah. What is interesting to me, Admiral, is that I know nothing about sailing a ship. I don't know anything about being a task force commander or commanding the Allies in Afghanistan like you. Richard Haas knows a lot about a lot of places in the world. I'm just a lawyer. I know torts. I know duty, breach, causation, damages. China is responsible here. It's not our fault that we don't have PPE in a large accumulation somewhere. It's not our. You never blame the victim for when the perpetrator causes an accident and an injury. But I do see a lot of the foreign policy establishment that is not eager for a confrontation with China for a variety of reasons, trying to fluff off on the world their unpreparedness. This is simply not acceptable in my view. It's not the American legal system.
I agree that China is responsible, and I believe that China is culpable, two different things, and I think that there has to be accountability. So my prescription would be hold China accountable, and that means an international, scientifically based investigation, certainly to include Chinese representation, but we need to understand how this got out of China, why it appears as though China was very slow to notify and may have held the World Health Organization back. There's a great deal of accountability, responsibility, and culpability there, all three of which need to be examined in depth. That's going to be a bit of a longer-term process. It lands on the election year here. That's unfortunate, but it's simply a reality. We're going to have to push through that, set up a serious commission. You should ask Richard Haas about that. And by the way, to China and U.S. and confrontation, Hugh, I commend to you, if you haven't read it yet, David Ignatius's column today about the potential for U.S.-China confrontation in the South China Sea. What would that look like from a military perspective? It's quite good and quite concerning.
If that's the case, you better get the TR back out pretty soon. Let me close this by asking you, Admiral, I think Taiwan is a huge issue here. And I think that we make our displeasure known because, again, I'm a realist. This is not going to go. They're not going to let us in. They're not going to admit it's too much of a problem for Xi. I just jump ahead to, maybe I'm wrong. I doubt it. I think there's a 10% chance he decides to go Khrushchev's secret speech and be honest with the world, but it's very low. What do we do vis-a-vis Taiwan? Because that is, to me, the lever that we use here.
I agree 100% with supporting Taiwan. I mean, here's a relatively small nation, 23 million. I've been there several times. I've met with the current president, Madam Tsai, and it is a dynamic, incredible economy for starters. I mean, it's about the 25th largest economy in the world, and it is, as you say, an opportunity to keep China from consolidating the complete South China Sea because geographically it sits as the gateway at the northern edge of the South China Sea. So we ought to support Taiwan. In my view, that means military to military activity, military sales. We can do that. It's going to be extremely annoying to China, but I don't think China is in a position to make a big move against Taiwan. Let's hope they're not tempted into doing something that they will regret deeply later.
A quick question: we've sold F-35s to Japan. It is the newest fighter. It is stealth. Should we sell them to Taiwan?
I don't think Taiwan needs the F-35 yet, but I think that the fourth and 4.5 generation fighters, the very high end of F-16, F-18, et cetera, I think would be eligible for them. And I think more in their price range. And coupled with working with the U.S. military to military context, I think that would be the appropriate level of sale.
Admiral, always a pleasure. Follow him at Stavridis. If you want to book him for your meeting, go to Washington Speakers. I think it's WSB Experience on Twitter, but Washington Speakers Bureau, and you will not be disappointed. Thank you, Admiral.